Folks, welcome to Burbank, California, and I'm joined again by a dear friend of the program. I was actually on the phone last night with the drummer Jim Keltner, and when I told him I was going to see this gentleman, he said, I consider that man a saint. He called him a saint. Dr. Rob Feinfield, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. It's nice to be back with you.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about one of your clients and a guy who was involved with Music Cares recently was Bill Withers.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about Bill and actually how you met him originally and then Music Cares.
Well, Bill was actually referred to me by Jim Keltner, and he's been a patient of mine for a number of years, and obviously really have enjoyed getting to know him and take care of him. He's a wonderful guy and an easy patient, which is always nice. That isn't always the case, and Bill's just great. Music Cares, of course, is part of the Grammy Foundation, and I've been involved with Music Cares and also Music for Sight, which is part of Sweet Relief.
Two separate things.
Two separate things. Music for Sight is a part of Sweet Relief, which provides healthcare for musicians, similar to Music Cares. Music Cares being a much larger organization, and I participate in both of those and see patients that are referred, and they either we treat them gratis or for a big discounted fee because we want to help support artists. And as far as Bill goes, I think you'll find it interesting that I brought him in on a project that was happening over at Johnny Lee Shell's Ultratone studio, produced by Tony Bronigal. And so Tony was producing an artist named Danielle Nicole, who used to be part of the trio Trampled Underfoot. But she launched her own solo career, and she has the Danielle Nicole Band. And she's a phenomenal singer and also bass player. In fact, I believe she won Bass Player of the Year a few years ago in the Blues Music Awards.
Was that band that she was in before? They toured all over the States?
They toured a lot in the States and have toured in Europe. And actually, the band is quite interesting because it was made up of three siblings, two brothers and a sister,
wow.
The Schnebelins from Kansas City, Missouri. But Danielle, she goes by Danielle Nicole now, she went off on her own, I think, a couple years ago, and has put out a few CDs, a couple of which have been produced by Tony Bronigal over at Johnny Lee Shell's studio. And so anyway, they were working on a project that and I was familiar with it, and I had popped by the studio on occasion and heard some of the sessions. And so one day, I thought, well, it would be really nice if Bill Withers took a listen to Danielle.
What was it about, like, with your aesthetic? How did you know that he could be a good fit? I mean, obviously,
yeah. Well, Danielle has a very rootsy, soulful voice. She can, along the lines of Etta James, Aretha Franklin. I mean, and I'm not being, above the fray here when I mention those names. She's got that kind of talent, and then coupling that with her virtuosity on the bass. In fact, one day when I was over at the studio, she was tracking a song and playing the bass, accompanying herself, and Kenny Gradney from Little Feat was there, who's also a good friend, and Kenny pulled me outside, and he had never heard, I think, Danielle play before, and he just shook his head and said, "That's just not fair, having that kind of talent." So anyway,
not easy to sing and play bass at the same time.
No, but she pulls it off. So anyway, I thought that if there was a chance that Bill could hear her, I thought he would really dig it. So anyway, that afternoon I texted Tony and said, would you mind if I brought Bill over to the studio? And so he called me back and he said, Bill Withers. I said, yeah, of course. And he said, well, yeah, look, no problem. Bring him over. So at the end of the afternoon on a Wednesday, I brought him over. Actually, he met me there, and they had just finished tracking a couple of tracks from her album, which is fantastic, by the way. It's called Cry No More. I would highly recommend it. It's absolutely outstanding. And Bill took a listen. Of course, everybody was, impressed just to meet him, and they were trying to be cool.
Right? Totally.
They were trying to be cool, but I could tell.
Was Gradney there, or just
no? It was Johnny Lee and Tony, me, and I think Danielle. I think it was just
some of the coolest cats in the world.
But Tony was really funny because Tony just said, "Look, I'm just going to put all decorum aside and just tell you just how big of an influence you've been on my life, so it was just great, and it's so wonderful to see artists appreciate each other, and Bill really enjoyed being there. So he listened to some of the stuff that was being done that day,
right?
And I could tell that he dug it. So I said to him, Bill, how about a Bill Withers song for Danielle? One that has never been done before. Something perhaps that's never been produced. You got one of those for
You
her?
put him on the spot?
I did. I kind of gave him a little introduction before he came, because I told him who she was, and I told him, I said, you're going to like her. And I said, if you've got some material from the past that hasn't been produced, see what you think. So I brought it up, and he said, oh, I can see what Rob's up to. I see where he's going. And then he said, Danielle, you and I are going to have a little meeting out in the car, just the two of us. And so he took her out the car, and Tony and Johnny Lee and I sat there for a few minutes. It was starting to get late in the evening, and I had to get going. So I walked down the driveway, and they were listening to a demo apparently in the car. And then she liked him. He really liked her sound. She liked the song that was being demoed for her, and so he gave her that song. And I'll never forget, because about a half hour later he called me, and he said, people are always trying to get me to come to this studio and that studio and hang out here and hang out there. And he says, I'm just not that guy typically. I write alone, I work, and I'm retired, and I don't do much. And he said, I trusted your judgment, and he said, I was pleasantly surprised, and so I gave her that tune, and I'm just going to let them do whatever they want to do with it. And so they actually cut it the next day, and it's called Hot Spell, and it's on her album. Cry No More. So
I just want to be clear. The demo he was playing in the car was something that they were working on for him.
No, so the demo actually he had produced, and with his daughter singing. Who I'm not sure when that was done.
Bill's daughter.
But Bill's daughter.
Okay, so he was sampling that for.
Correct. He was playing it for Danielle to see, if she thought it would be a fit, and then so she went and she sang it and played bass on it, of course, and with Johnny Lee and Tony. And,
was Johnny playing rhythm guitar on it, or just engineering?
I believe Johnny did play some rhythm guitar,
best.
And some keyboard parts actually. That's something people don't know about Johnny Lee.
Hot Spell.
I
dig it.
So it's a Bill Withers tune, and actually, what's also very cool is if you go on YouTube, she has done some unplugged sessions of her album and does that song and does a great unplugged version of Hot Spell. So check out Danielle Nicole's Cry No More.
I was transcribing my second interview with Brownigal, and he was talking about Austin, the template that they have for basically all the musicians, a society that it's a healthcare society for all the musicians of Austin. The musicians put in money. It's a self, I guess, it's supported by the musicians, and it allows them to have health insurance. Tony was talking about that on a larger level in more urban centers. Is that realistic in a place like Los Angeles? I mean, and what did you think about that? What do you think about those kind of models anyway?
I'm not familiar exactly with what's happening in Austin. I know in New Orleans they have a collective for musicians that I think has been successful, and of course there's great support for artists there. And I would say why not try something like that here? And I think in large part Music Cares, which isn't is supported by the Grammy community and has generated lots of funds, and they have a big dinner. In fact, one of my very close friends, John Meglin, who is one of the principals at AEG and is in charge of their global touring, has been very involved with Music Cares and has raised probably millions of dollars actually for Music Cares. And so,
can I just ask you though,
yeah.
like as far as the that's a lot of money. So who's over? Because that's the thing. Once you start raising that money, if you're not careful, it can get misused.
Right. Well, I think Music Cares does a great job of administrating those funds.
Good.
And Sweet Relief, which I mentioned earlier, does an excellent job of administrating those funds as well. And unfortunately, Rob Max, who was the CEO of Sweet Relief, passed away about a year ago, who was a good friend of mine.
You talk about his legacy. I think that when we did our interview,
we talked. I think
had we talked about that already?
I'm not sure, but anyway,
Yeah.
Rob was just a great guy and a huge supporter of the artists, and had been a rock and roll singer himself. But he was just a wonderful guy and all about supporting the healthcare for the artists. So those, I think it's anything that we can do to be a patron and a supporter of the arts. That's what clearly we don't do enough of that in this country. So others
No,
have to
and
do it.
I wanted to ask you, going back to your days spent early in your career in the rural parts of Louisiana, working with people that were pretty impoverished, didn't have a lot of resources, and how that stuck with you today in a town that is, has a lot. There's a lot of money here. There's a lot of people with money, but that early experience you had working with those communities. Can you talk about how that stayed with you in your career, and how you've kept your heart open in that sense?
Well, in my training in medicine, I've always been exposed to populations that are underfunded, and for example, in medical school in San Francisco, I worked at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic.
What year was that?
This was 1978.
Oh man!
So a legendary place, obviously. And as a third-year medical student, I got to work at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic and basically was functioning as a doctor supervised by an MD. And that was just outstanding. And then I worked at San Francisco General Hospital in the inner city in San Francisco. And so, all of us, I think, as physicians go through that type of training. Some get more involved in volunteerism than others. But and down in Louisiana at the Oxnard Clinic where I trained, we were sent to very remote areas.
Can you name the cities?
Houma,
Louisiana.
Down on the bayou. Yeah, absolutely. He was there for 9 months, working with the Cajun population, who were just wonderful, and great experience working at the Charity Hospital there. I was up in Monroe, Louisiana, near the Arkansas border, working in the Charity Hospital there as well, and was in Mobile, Alabama, working at the University of South Alabama. We served as their Department of Ophthalmology at that time. And so I was there for 9 months. So they moved us around a lot. And then I was back in New Orleans, of course, working at the old eye, ear, nose, and throat hospital across from Charity Hospital in downtown New Orleans. So I got a lot of that kind of exposure. And then, being back here in practice for the last 30 years here in Los Angeles, there's a lot of money here, and there's a lot of poverty here too. And people think that LA is just Hollywood and lots of money floating around, and there's plenty of that, but there's a lot of people. We have a big homeless population here, unfortunately, and a lot of people who struggle. So
I guess my question is, without getting too deep in the weeds, with a private practice, you're on call today. You have 6 doctors. Are you on the same page as it relates to being able to try to help the entire community here?
Well, we in our practice, we have always tried to take care of everyone regardless of their needs, and so regardless of their funds rather, and serve their needs. And so we try to make things reasonable and affordable, and then if we're not able to provide whatever care, we try to hook them up with who can. And our hospital across the street does a great job of that. Providence St. Joseph Medical Center has a whole fund actually for the poor, and they have set aside funds. They've had fundraisers, and they provide care at a discounted fee-for-service level, which we accept, of course. And so we try to do whatever we can. Absolutely.
The this album that you foisted on me,
Barry
Goldberg.
Yeah.
I want to show this here
Sure.
for Barry's tuning in, but I didn't know you had producer chops.
Well,
I mean, Johnny Lee's. I mean, actually, Brown Eagle's the producer and Johnny's
Yeah.
the engineer. But what
Right.
talk about that track?
well, this actually, Barry's my cousin, first of all, and who we've
Mazel
spoken
tov.
about. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've spoken, and we've had a lot of fun and worked together in music. We co-produced the Nicole Gordon album years ago, and but this is a project, a label project that Barry did, produced really largely by Carla Olson, and Saul Davis was also involved. But Carla did most of the work on this, and so what Barry wanted to do, he always wanted to do an instrumental album representing some of the music that influenced him as a keyboard player in the late 50s and early 60s. So this is like a early 60s soul jazz / R&B.
Yeah, Hank Ballard.
With Barry on the Hammond B3, of course. With phenomenal musicians playing on it, and it's a great album called In the Groove. So one day, and I had been over at Johnny's, checking out some of the sessions. I got some really good video footage, by the way, of some of the sessions, which I'll turn you on.
Yeah, hit me to that,
I
man.
will.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah. So one day though, it was funny. Barry called me. I was in my office, and he said, "Rob, there's a track you haven't heard, but there's a track that has a lyric on this album." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting, guy. I thought it was all instrumental." He said, "Well, there's one track that's got a lyric on it, and it's an anti-Trump tune. It's called 'Guess I Had Enough of You.'" And I said, "Okay, very good." He said, "There's two lyrics to it. Guess I had enough of you, all the changes you put me through." And I said, "Very cool." And he said, "I need somebody from that era to sing that lyric and then kind of ad-lib and rap the rest of the song. It's like a driving one-chord Chicago blues groove with Rob Stone playing harmonica on it. Just really kicks." And he said, "Can you think of anybody who could fit that bill?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got just the guy." He said, "Who?" I said, "Les McCann. The legendary, the one, the only."
I'm surprised
Les
Barry
McCann.
didn't think about that.
So, well,
Les,
a lot of people
Les.
didn't even know that Les was still around.
Well,
so
he's had, he's been he battles some
he does,
stroke
he does,
and.
and Les is a patient of mine as well.
Is he really?
He is.
So you are marinating in the R&B gumbo. So,
Well, I collect musicians. That's part.
That's
of
right. That's right.
thing.
So Barry was totally hip to the idea.
So I said, "Let me call Les," and I said, I called up Les and I told him about the project, and I I can't tell you exactly what he said because it's not suitable for publication. But let's just say he was overly enthusiastic to
He was
participate.
pumped. Yeah, he's pumped.
So the track was done, and I arranged for Les to come over to Johnny Lee's studio, and one on my lunch hour on a Friday, and in 2 hours I think we did like 7 passes at the song, and Les told stories, and I've got video of all of that, by the way, and then later on we all got together and edited down those clips and the tracks for the album, and it's the number one. It's the first track on the album. "Guess I Had Enough of You."
And he was I mean, Les really riffed. He made up some lyrics on
He
it.
did, and he has co-credit on the lyric with Barry.
Unbelievable.
Barry gave him writing credit on it.
Can you talk about? I was down in Atlanta with the great Jimmy Heath, part of the Heath brothers. He refers to Trump as resident chump. You know, in your mind, how do we come back together as a society after this everywhere we turn, it's like it's just you're abhorred by what he does or says, and yet there is this huge flock of people that don't seem to want to even acknowledge that, even though it just doesn't seem, not just American, it's just not human.
Right.
How do I mean, I try to affect change in my world. That's why I'm here. But in your mind, I mean, is the recovery, you look at eye conditions all the time. You can tell people how long it's going to be, potentially.
And we deal with their healthcare issues and the insurance issues and pre-existing conditions and coverage and the ACA, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, it's obviously shocking what's been transpiring in Washington in the White House in the last 2 years, and I think that in many ways people have been immunized and inoculated to Trump and kind of numbed to him because he wears you down after a while. His messaging, as my wife had said, his messaging is so good and it's so
tyrannical.
Yeah, and it's very simple, and he just keeps saying the same thing over and over. And what we do know is that you can con people, you can almost hypnotize masses of people and get them to think a certain way, and then even the people that are outraged, as I said, you become immune to it because otherwise you can't continue to function. So, and I think the outrage that people had